Suddenly, the parents appeared and began banging on the car window. "Dad, did someone ask you for something?" "Now, what might that be?" "You are always so stubborn. Just be quiet and convince Andrew. The chairman would prefer his own father, so he will decline. Otherwise, it seems these people were in league with my in-laws to oust my husband, Andrew, from his position as the next chairman." And suddenly, I noticed that my mother was holding something like a crowbar. She swung it high, and then crash. The window glass shattered with a loud noise. I was stunned when I heard that a suicide note was found in Andrew's car, which had fallen off a cliff. However, a week after the car was discovered, an envelope arrived via courier with a date specified. "Andrew?" I hurriedly took the envelope and, with trembling hands, opened it inside. There was a letter and a key. "Read this without my parents finding out." Of course, I knew that, but he must have wanted to write it that way. "I wrote this in case something happened. If I'm still there when you receive this, you can laugh and give it back to me. But if I'm not there, please, Jessica, take out what's stored in this locker and immediately flee to my uncle's place." As my sister-in-law, Rachel, and I read this, we looked at each other. Then we quickly grabbed the bare minimum and ran to the main house where my uncle-in-law lived. To protect myself and my children, and to let our parents know what they had done. My name is Jessica Gale, 34 years old. I would like to say I'm just an ordinary housewife, but that was only true until a week ago. Now, I am a widow with 2 children. My husband, Andrew, took his own life. At least, that's what I have been told is highly likely. His car had fallen off a cliff, and they say a suicide note was found in the dashboard. I do not believe it, cannot believe it, because it's true. There was no reason for him to take his own life. Not by himself. Rather, Andrew and I met at our workplace, a real estate chain of resort hotels. That was the job I had always wanted. When I was young, I was captivated by a large, beautiful hotel I visited at the invitation of my parents' acquaintance. I chose a university that taught important aspects of the tourism industry, and during my student years, I worked backstage at nearby hotels. Finally, I got a job at the resort hotel I had always dreamed of. It was a place known for its rigorous staff training, and I almost gave up early on. The reason I managed to keep going was thanks to a senior staff member at the time, as one by one others left because they couldn't stand it. There were people who kept an eye on me. That person was Andrew Gale, who later became my husband. After 2 years of dating, we got married. But at that time, I was surprised to learn a fact. Andrew was the nephew of the chairman of this real estate group. Eventually, he was to become a member of the upper management, but at that time, he was still training as an employee of the resort hotel. After we got married, he moved from the hotel to the real estate side and started showing up at his uncle's, the chairman's place. Originally, this group was a local real estate business that had grown significantly after the war. The current chairman, the second since the group was formed, had greatly contributed to its development. Thanks to convincing my parents during the bubble period, we suffered little damage when it burst. Later, he ventured into resort development, which he also progressed steadily. However, Things started to smell fishy around here after the current chairman fell ill last year. This was because the chairman had no biological children to succeed him. Here, the chairman had named Andrew as his successor, and this appointment shortened Andrew's life. I was stunned and couldn't fully grasp the news from the police that Andrew had died. At that point, my in-laws kept calling relentlessly. Jessica, something terrible has happened to Andrew, hasn't it? Something terrible? Is that all these people can say about their son? Hey, Jessica, it's going to be tough on your own, isn't it? Come stay with us. Yes, yes. It's going to be financially tough now that Andrew is gone, right? My in-laws took turns saying such things. Feeling angered by their words, I replied, I can't think about the future just yet. And with that, I hung up the phone. What are they talking about now? After all, I've only met these in-laws twice. Once to announce the marriage, and on the day of the ceremony. They didn't even show their faces when our son and daughter were born. Yes, Andrew had been avoiding his parents. When I was suspicious about the attitude of my in-laws at the time of our marriage, Andrew had said, they are scum who don't try to work themselves. Andrew's parents are currently holding a certain post within the Gale Real Estate Group. But that's to prevent them from doing anything. Andrew had told me about his parents. Everything they do turns out to be counterproductive for the group, despite the excellent skills of his uncle. That's why I gave them nominal positions to make sure they don't mess things up too much. They just go on trips under the guise of inspections. So didn't you get to travel around a lot with them? Andrew snorted in disbelief. Rachel and I were always left alone in our big house. Andrew has a sister named Rachel. She married a man whose profession has nothing to do with the group and lives in the city where he works. Andrew and his brother-in-law, Victor, got along strangely well. When he was nearby for work, he would go out of his way to talk with Andrew. Rachel would say about these men, I'm jealous of you, brother. Yes, these two siblings get along well, and both had a strained relationship with their parents. But I'm fine. Once I'm married and move away, I don't care about them anymore. Rachel was quite straightforward. But my brother is involved with the group. What does that mean? Our parents know they are the failures of the group, so they hate seeing my successful brother. Is that how it is? That's how it is with our family. But it's different with your parents, isn't it? Not really. That's right. I also don't have a good relationship with my parents at home. No, it was good when I was a child. As an only daughter, I thought I was loved to some extent. But their true nature emerged when I was in college. Quit college and come back home. That was the sudden message I received. The reason was a marriage proposal. They tried to call me back for that reason when I was just about 20 years old. Apparently, a young master from a notable local family had taken a fancy to me during his return home. His spoiled demand that he wanted me was something my parents were willing to fulfill for their own benefit. We've raised you this far, so you should be filial, shouldn't you? I felt my image of my parents crumbling inside me. These people had raised me as their daughter, wanting something in return. When I realized that, I firmly refused to return home. Then, the remittance of my tuition and living expenses was stopped. They probably thought that would make me return. but I stubbornly refused to go back. I consulted with my professor and looked for ways to continue my studies without being taken back by my parents. It was a desperate struggle until I graduated. I managed to cover my tuition through scholarships. The problem was living expenses. I had to move out of my secure one-room apartment, sell unused furniture, and move into an old apartment. Then it was all about university, part-time jobs, and job hunting. I only went back to my room to sleep. As a result, this work experience led to my employment where I met Andrew, and my parents were strangely happy about my marriage to Andrew. Aren't they good parents? I smiled wryly at Andrew, who implied a comparison with his own family. It's different. They investigated you. They found out you were the nephew of the chairman of the real estate group. Andrew couldn't believe it for a while, but when he met the two who came for the birth of our son, Ben, and daughter, Emily, Andrew also realized they were no different from his own parents. After all, my parents had said this:
Ah,
with 2 children born, your future is secure now. Yes. It will make our lives easier too. At that moment, Andrew's smile slightly twisted. Both Andrew and I were sensitive to the words spoken by parents, especially since Andrew knew about my hardships during my student days. Had they let their guard down a bit, or did they think it was natural? In any case, their words were clearly intent on parasitizing our future and our children. Afterwards, Andrew also became wary of the two. Distant in-laws, parents who try to make excessive contact. While being wary of both sides, I continued raising our children. Fortunately, with Andrew's current position and salary, we could afford to hire a housekeeper or sitter. We had no trustworthy relatives, but we managed by ourselves. However, last year, the situation changed. The chairman fell ill. The chairman, still in his 60s, was always physically fit and could be considered immune to illness. I had heard that his body was toned and he had no problems with blood pressure or anything. However, an impact he received on his head when he was young had now formed a hematoma, pressing on his brain. He survived emergency surgery, and the prognosis was good with no lasting effects. But at this time, the group was unsettled by the fact that no successor had been appointed. The chairman himself must have thought he could keep going, which is why he hadn't decided. But illness comes unexpectedly. Once he knew that, he had to think about a successor. Now, the problem was the selection. The chairman and his wife had no children. Neither a biological child nor an adopted one was available at this point. So during his convalescence, the chairman named Andrew. Within the group companies, it seemed a reasonable choice. Most senior employees knew that Andrew was training within the group and receiving executive training. However, there were people who simply couldn't accept this. The in-laws. Wait a minute, brother. Isn't he still young? Aren't I the closest to you? Yes. Why bypass this man for Andrew? They apparently confronted the resting chairman. Then the chairman rebuked them, saying, "If I left it to you, you'd ruin the group." Apparently, they explained why Andrew was nominated, but that turned the pressure towards Andrew. They said, "Resign. You're still young. Say you want your parent to take over instead." Frankly, it was a threat. Initially, they said, please. But gradually their tone changed to, do something about it or else. This is a bit problematic. What do you mean? If we leave them be, they might harm me, you, and the kids. What? I initially thought, would they go that far? They would. Andrew spat it out. I never thought of them as parents. They probably don't think of us siblings as their children either. No, that's not it. They only see children as tools to generate benefits for themselves. It's the same with my family, too. No. Andrew shook his head. Their level of scumminess is worse. Your parents are just hanging on for the benefits, but mine try to take the benefits themselves. What should we do? I was startled by the word, take. A family filled with love and trust that we finally had. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. I have a plan. First, I'll make sure the building manager keeps an eye out for any suspicious people. So, Jessica, please look after the kids when you're outside. Am I okay on my own? I'll ask the security company through my uncle. They'll discreetly guard you when you go out. I understood and replied. Since then, I chose places that were popular for outings with the kids. I also actively participated in gatherings with other moms, which I usually hesitated to join. My reasoning was that it would be harder to approach me and the kids when we're in a group. But even so, there was an incident where it seemed like the kids were about to be abducted. It first happened while we were all playing in the park. I was supposed to be watching the kids with my mom friends. A plump, middle-aged woman, who seemed to be just walking around, suddenly picked up my daughter and started running. Immediately, a security guard who had been watching from the shadows came running over. However, the woman who tried to abduct my daughter ran away with surprising agility. In the end, we never found out why or who was behind it. Be careful. It's a scary world out there, everyone said. The common understanding remained that we had to be vigilant against both money motives and mischief. However, there was one thing I had forgotten to be cautious about. Hey, I bumped into my parents in the parking lot of the apartment. It was just after shopping with the kids, as we were getting out of the car. In a panic, I turned back into the car and locked it. Bang, bang. They deliberately knocked hard on the car windows. Mom, why are Grandma and Grandpa doing this? I'm scared. I opened the window just enough to speak through, though I really didn't want to open it at all because we couldn't talk otherwise. What do you want? Finally opened it. Hey, Jessica, can you ask Andrew? What? Look, it's not right for young Andrew to become the next chairman just yet, is it? A chill ran down my spine. Could these people be? Dad, did someone ask you for something? Now, what might that be? Father feigned ignorance. And then my mother said, You are always so stubborn. Just be quiet and convince Andrew. The chairman would prefer his own father, so he will decline. Otherwise, my mother was holding something like a crowbar, and just as she swung it high, crash! The window glass shattered with a loud noise. The kids screamed and cried, and then my mother reached her hand in. Get down! I shouted to the kids, and, hoping to signal any nearby security guards, I repeatedly honked the horn. Fortunately, sounds of several men running over followed soon after. The two of them clicked their tongues and immediately left the scene, escaping in a nearby car. The security guards came over and asked us if we were okay. I'm fine, but the kids. I'm okay, my son replied loudly, but it was certain that shards of glass had fallen on both of them. We'll go back to our apartment now. Please, could you accompany us to the entrance? The security guards agreed and escorted us. The building manager was surprised by our situation and promised to be vigilant against any intruders from outside. And later that night, I told Andrew about everything that had happened. Out of all people, my parents.
Ah,
They must have influenced them, promising them good positions if they became chairman or something. It's possible. Very possible. Why are all our parents like that? At this rate, it's seriously bad. I'm going to see my uncle and try to get him to hide you guys for a while. To your uncle? But we have to do it without being noticed. Also, I'll contact Rachel. I want her to stay with you guys for a bit. But isn't that a bother for Rachel? Given who we're dealing with, it's necessary. Plus, since I'm being talked about as a successor, they might think something could happen to Rachel too, being of the same blood. It's better if we present a united front. Saying this, Andrew immediately contacted Rachel. I can't believe it. Those people. Okay, brother, I'll join you. What about my husband? Victor has work, right?
yeah.
Well, that's true. But okay, I'll talk to him. Thank you. At times like this, I think it's good to have siblings. And Rachel came to our house the very next day. Rachel said, I told my husband about the situation, and he said he has some things he wants to look into and will join us later. Really? Victor is reliable. Well, he is the man I chose. Laughing, we shared a moment of relief. But the day after that conversation, that call came from the police. We found Andrew Gale's car at the bottom of a cliff. I couldn't immediately comprehend what that meant. What does that mean? He was brought to the hospital earlier. I couldn't quite catch the words that followed. I knew they were speaking to me from the other side, but I couldn't move. Startled by my reaction, Rachel took over the call for me. After that, it felt like Rachel was pulling me along everywhere. We went to the police, verified things, and were handed an envelope found in the dashboard. A suicide note? When I opened it, there was a printed letter inside. The content was about not being able to bear the responsibility of being nominated as chairman, apologizing for it. So the police concluded that he took his own life? No, there are still autopsies and other procedures to be conducted. We just showed you this because it was found. He wouldn't do it himself. I was shouting that out loud at the scene. He was so careful. He had told me to be so careful. After that, I couldn't form any more words. The police said they would contact us when it was time to return Andrew's body. I only vaguely remember what happened in the following period. The local TV news was still unclear whether it was an accident or not, but they mentioned a suicide note was found, suggesting he might have taken his own life. I turned off the TV in anger, and the kids looked at me anxiously. When is Daddy coming back? My son was 8, my daughter only 5. I had let both of them take some time off from elementary school and kindergarten. I was really grateful that Rachel was there. At that time, my mind felt like it was covered by a thin film with no sense of reality in anything. But a week after the car was found, an envelope arrived via scheduled courier. Jessica, this. Rachel handed it to me, who was still dazed. I glanced at the sender's section, and my eyes widened. Andrew? In a rush, I took the envelope and, with trembling hands, opened it inside. There was a letter and a key. Read this without my parents finding it. Of course, I knew that, but he must have wanted to write it that way. I wrote this in case something happened. If I'm there when you receive this, you can laugh and give it back to me. But if I'm not, please, Jessica, take out what's stored in this locker and immediately flee to my uncle's place. As Rachel and I read this, we looked at each other. Then, hurriedly taking only the essentials, we took the kids and all got into Rachel's car. My car had been under repair since that time. I felt insecure about driving a replacement car to my uncle's place in the next state. So I relied on Rachel. Leave it to me, but wear a hat and mask. Rachel said that with a smile. And then we drove straight on. We were anxious until we reached the main house in the next state. I assumed security was nearby, but still worried about what might happen to the car after what happened to Andrew. In the car, we had informed the main houses that we were on our way, parked on the property, and ran towards the main house. Then, it seemed they were already waiting, as the chairman and his wife personally welcomed us. Good you came, Jessica, Rachel. Andrew told me to keep you guarded and eventually send you over here, but I never expected it to come to this. Thank you for having us. I'm sorry. This was the only place we could turn to. I thanked him. The children were looking around in surprise at the grand entrance. Don't worry about it. No, I never thought it would come to this. I underestimated the situation. I never imagined they would actually target Andrew himself. Those bastards. The chairman clenched his fist in frustration. We were then led into a spacious living room. It was a room with a calm and warm atmosphere. The lady of the house directed the housekeeper to bring some snacks for the children to one corner of the room. Thank you. It's all right. You want to keep the children within your sight now, don't you? Yes. I didn't want to take my eyes off them for a moment. But the discussions we needed to have were not something I wanted the children to hear directly. He's always been a rotten one, but it's been difficult to completely cut him out from the group because we couldn't quite pin down how. Letting him roam free has led to this mess. It's not your fault, Uncle. My parents were involved in this incident as well. Both Andrew and I had terrible parents, it seems. If it had come to this, we should have made Andrew our adopted son sooner. She let that slip out. Then the chairman looked up suddenly. Yes, that's a good idea. Call the lawyer. Uncle? I don't want these children to end up like Andrew. The chairman made that suggestion to me. Eventually, after the autopsy, Andrew's body was brought to the main house. It was for a private funeral and a memorial service within the group. I attended as the chief mourner with the children. My parents were also there, shamelessly sitting in the family section. The attending bosses and colleagues, all bewildered and saddened by Andrew's sudden loss, expressed their condolences. This is truly Andrew was a really good employee. We were looking forward to his future contributions within the group. Thank you. Andrew would have been honored to hear that. I mechanically repeated such greetings. Friends from the same cohort were crying over his sudden loss. All the people Andrew had been involved with were genuinely good people. Yet, his parents. After the memorial service, the chairman called the family, in-laws, and management to gather at the main house. The large garden and hall of the main house were crowded with many people. Amidst this, someone rushed in. You. It must have been just now that he arrived. Rachel's husband, Victor, came running, clutching a briefcase. Sorry I'm late, Rachel, Jessica. Things took longer on my end, but it helped that the memorial service and general meeting were on the same day. It worked out. Victor grinned. I'll return this to you. He took out a set of documents and a USB drive from his briefcase. Is it okay now? That was what had been inside the coin locker, indicated by the key we had received. When we rushed out in Rachel's car, we had met up with Victor along the way and asked him to make copies of the documents and memory stick. You've passed the copies to our lawyer, right? Yes, Victor said. Good. We really needed the originals here. I nodded emphatically. During the general meeting that began shortly after, the chairman spoke about the incident in front of everyone and expressed his regrets over losing Andrew, the designated successor. Then, when a pause came in his speech, the chairman said, "This is truly, truly regrettable, and I believe there is one thing I was wrong about." The chairman called me and the two children over. The children, now in front of all these adults, looked scared, as if they were about to cry. I reassured the children from behind, saying, "It's okay." Therefore, I have decided to nominate the next successors right here. They are my new children, Ben and Emily, Andrew's children, whom I've adopted. The crowd murmured in surprise. Many may be surprised, but I believe that keeping Andrew merely as my nephew contributed to this tragedy. Right? The crowd's eyes turned towards my in-laws. Brother, what are you saying? Shall I say it here? Yes, go ahead. He killed himself, right? A suicide note was found. Probably couldn't handle the expectations given to him. Oh, it sounds like you still have something to say. Yes. And now you want to make these children your adopted children? Are you going to put unnecessary pressure on them too? Well, maybe not. They are your grandchildren after all, so they might not feel it that much. The father-in-law grimaced. The truth is, Andrew did not kill himself, the chairman stated firmly. The crowd murmured again. What are you talking about? The suicide note was found in the dashboard. No one has announced that it was found in the dashboard. At that moment, Victor raised his voice, asking the chairman if it was all right to speak. Yes, please go ahead. Meanwhile, the father-in-law continued to protest disgracefully. If it was found in the car, that must be the case, right? That's why I've been trying to tell you, we, the police, haven't leaked anything to the media at all. Or should I say, you really had no interest or concern about what I do. With that, Victor pulled out his police badge from his suit's inner pocket. Yes, he was a deputy police chief in the prefecture where we lived.
Uh,
He choked on his words. Did he really not realize it? I was truly dumbfounded. I had indeed heard from Rachel that since she started working, there had been no contact, not even a report about her marriage. Yet, wouldn't one at least be curious about their in-law's profession? That's just the kind of person he is. Rachel's murmur was barely audible. Well, as someone involved, all I could really do in the investigation was provide crucial evidence. Victor explained further. Initially, the police had been conducting a detailed investigation on the car that was pulled up from the cliff. It seems they had quickly noticed that someone had tampered with the brakes, and that tampering happened the day Andrew sent a letter via courier, specifying the date. That day, Andrew first went to place something in a coin locker at the station. Then, he went to a convenience store inside the station to send a letter to Jessica. That's when it took a little extra time. It was then that the brake system was tampered with. However, that alone didn't immediately lead to any issues. After that, Andrew was driving to this main house. But there are several winding roads along the way, right? Small murmurs began around the room. Many agreed, recognizing the situation. Then a car performing aggressive driving came along. Of course, it was intentional. And this road isn't always wide, you know. Indeed, it's a common issue in rural areas where, despite frequent traffic, the roads aren't always adequately wide. In such a place, Andrew was forced into a situation where he had to press the brakes subtly due to the aggressive driving, but eventually he realized they were failing. By then, it was too late. So, that's what happened? The chairman gravely asked. He spoke obliquely, but everyone understood the implications. Yes, and the police have identified the aggressive driver from Andrew's dashcam footage and have already detained the driver. Victor said this with a smile towards my in-laws. But how are we related to that? The aggressive driver was just a hired individual. The actual employer is still under investigation. However, Father, you are about to be charged with a separate issue. A separate issue. What? Yes, it's about the embezzlement you've been involved in for years. Andrew had been investigating this matter quietly, and this is the evidence. Suddenly, various documents were projected on every wall from multiple projectors that seemed to be operated from somewhere else. For now, we will arrest you on these embezzlement charges. Then, the doors at the back opened, and police officers entered the venue. And one more thing. He glanced briefly at me, then turned his gaze elsewhere. You over there. Us? My parents were starting to rise from their seats. You are being arrested for damaging Jessica's car. But it's a family matter, my mother exclaimed. Facing my mother, I sharply asked, a parent who breaks a car window with something like a crowbar? Indifferent even if glass shards fall on their grandchildren? I glared intensely and said with all my might, you are not parents. My parents slumped back down in their seats. After that, the in-laws arrested for embezzlement confessed during questioning to plotting Andrew's death, adding to their charges. And my parents were also charged with aiding in the in-laws' plot, in addition to property damage. The case was first leaked to the local media, appearing immediately in regional papers and local news. But of course, it didn't end there. Given the sensational nature of the case and the involvement of actual parents in the crime, it became a perfect feature for national news and talk shows. And in today's era, that wasn't the end. They were permanently marked with a digital tattoo. Even if they were released, what could they possibly do? Well, that's none of my concern now. Since then, we've been living in this main house, given rooms by the lady of the house. The chairman's wife adores the new children, Emily and Ben, who were unable to have children of her own, perhaps overly so. But for now, I think it's for the best. Having just lost their father, I also had to transfer them to a new elementary school and kindergarten. I regret involving them in adult conflicts, but considering safety, I believe this was the best solution. Meanwhile, the chairman insists on staying healthy until the children are grown, dedicating himself to physical fitness every day. Everyone, coffee is ready. Here in this house, I spend my days caring for the children and keeping the couple company. I'm not sure how much I contribute to these two, but for the children's sake, I plan to live to the fullest.